This past summer, I talked about the silent film Nosferatu, and I made the claim in that video that it was the first horror movie ever made. And I did genuinely believe this at the time. However, recently, I have stumbled upon a silent film that came before it that could very well be considered the first horror movie. And that movie is a film called L'Inferno. L'Inferno is an Italian film from 1911, which translates to The Inferno. I'm about to say 3 Italian names in a row, so I'm gonna look at my notes for this part. Directed by Francesco Bertolini, Giuseppe De Liguoro, and Adolfo Padovan, this was Italy's first feature-length film. Prior to this, it was thought that an audience would not commit to sitting down and watching an hour-long film, which might be a weird concept considering how long movies are today. And this is a live-action adaptation of the first part of the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri, also known as Dante's Inferno. Dante was an Italian poet from Florence, roughly in the late 12th to early 13th century. During this time, Italy was composed of several independent kingdoms, essentially. This included the Kingdom of Florence, and a coalition of these kingdoms was currently at war with Pope Gregory XI. And Dante, himself being a devout Catholic, had sided with the Pope in this conflict. For this, he was exiled from his home of Florence, and it is during this period of exile that he wrote the Divine Comedy. The story of the Divine Comedy as a whole is about the poet Dante's journey through hell, then purgatory, and then heaven. However, most people tend to just ignore the last two and just focus on the horror concepts and the creative punishments of his interpretation of what hell could be like. And it is these ideas that were adapted into the world's first blockbuster film, L'Inferno. I could just call it The Inferno throughout this movie, or Dante's Inferno, but then I feel like it might get confused with the book itself, and also L'Inferno sounds really cool, so I'm just gonna keep calling it that. L'Inferno could also be considered the world's first horror film, as it depicted these interpretations of tortured souls and their punishments in hell well over a decade before Nosferatu would terrify audiences in Germany. And another very interesting thing about this film is that, like Nosferatu, L'Inferno was almost lost forever. This was made during the early days of cinema, and the film type that they used for these movies decays a lot faster than modern film. And as a result of this, most copies of the film were either completely or partially lost forever. However, certain film societies in Britain and America realized that they had overlapping parts of this film and were able to successfully compile it into the complete picture, L'Inferno. And this is how we are now able to view this film in its entirety. And another really cool thing before we get into the story itself is that while this is an adaptation of Dante's Inferno, it takes heavy visual inspiration from the artwork of French artist Gustave Doré. He became most known for his wood carving illustrations of scenes from classical literature, such as the Bible, Paradise Lost, and of course, the Divine Comedy. And how these illustrations were made is that the illustration first had to be carved on a slab of wood, and this slab would then be coated in ink and would be used to press the image onto paper, which is a really cool way of being able to mass produce the same image for multiple, books. And I do also want to acknowledge that while these illustrations are credited to Gustave himself, he did also have an entire team working on these. They were mass producing thousands of these illustrations for these great works, and so of course one man couldn't have done this on his own. He was mainly the designer or the architect for these images, and then he had a team that would bring these images to life. And so whenever I or others talk about the works of Gustave Doré, primarily his wood-printed works, just know that I'm talking about Gustave and his entire team. but many of his illustrations for Dante's Inferno became the visual inspiration for the film L'Inferno. So whenever I show clips of the movie itself, I will also try and find the artwork that accompanies that image, because I just think that art imitating art is really cool. And the way that they do this, especially in 1911, is very creative and just mind-boggling. So with all that said, thank you so much for watching, and let's get into the story of the first ever horror movie. We open on the character Dante, played by Salvatore Papa. He is lost in this immense, dark forest. He says that he is here because he lost his way, which is a representation or symbolic of Dante losing his path in real life, in the real world. The story of the Divine Comedy is Dante's journey from a path of sin to a path of righteousness, and how he is guided from hell all the way up to heaven in the hopes of returning him to that paradise. He attempts to climb the mountain of salvation on his own, but he is stopped by three beasts: a panther, a lion, and a she-wolf. The three beasts represent the three main sins that are pulling Dante away from the path of righteousness. The panther represents avarice, the lion pride, and the she-wolf lust. And by modern standards, the creatures look kinda goofy. The first two are very obviously just men in suits, and the she-wolf is just a dog. But regardless, Dante is chased off of the hill. We then cut to a character named Beatrice, who is a very important figure in the Divine Comedy. In real life, Beatrice was a woman that Dante loved, but in the Divine Comedy, she is reimagined as this divine being, one who steps out of heaven in order to hopefully bring Dante back to it. And here she travels to Limbo, the first lair of hell that I will talk about later. And there she seeks out Virgil, a spirit who, in the real world, was a legendary Roman poet who wrote works such as the Aeneid. And she begs Virgil to be Dante's guide through hell in order to show him the fate that he must avoid. She specifically says that it is her love for Dante that compels her to ask this of Virgil. She sees the path that Dante is currently on and wishes that he could return to the path of righteousness. And this shot is also really cool because they do have this like spinning halo behind Beatrice's head in this scene, which of course is a nod to many works of Catholic art in which divine beings have a ringed halo behind their heads. But the way they do it in this film looks really cool. I love it so much. And after they speak, she then flies upwards to heaven, which, fun fact, L'Inferno was also the first ever film in which wires were used to portray characters flying about on camera. There were a lot of cinema firsts that could be attributed to this movie. And after this, Virgil disappears and then reappears in the same forest where Dante is currently lost. Dante then explains to this new visitor that he went through life the hard and wild way. In other words, he followed his own path and turned away from the path of God. And it is this decision that has led him to this dark forest. And then, standing atop a smoking mountain, the two find themselves at the mouth to the entrance of hell. The inscription on the door is a little shorter than it is in the original book, but I will read it nonetheless. Through me the way to the city of Dolent, Dolent being a word for sorrow. Through me the way to eternal suffering. Through me you walk among the lost people. And then, of course, the most popular line from the entire Divine Comedy, abandon all hope, ye who enter here. This version of the inscription is missing a lot in my opinion, so now I'm going to read the full version from the original Divine Comedy. Why, yes, I do in fact have a printed version of the Divine Comedy. One at a time, ladies. Through me the way is to the city dolent. Through me the way is to eternal dole. Through me the way among the people lost. Justice incited my sublime creator, created me divine omnipotence, the highest wisdom and the primal love. Before me there were no created things, only etern, and I eternal last. All hope abandon, ye who enter in. It's slightly reworded in this version, but the message still stands. This movie chose to omit the ideas of eternal wisdom and primal love in favor of just focusing on the suffering of the inhabitants of hell. Dante is terrified, but together the two enter hell. The first sight that they come upon is the river Acheron, which in Greek mythology was known as the River of Misery, the river that takes you to the underworld. See, for those of you who don't know, while Dante himself was Catholic and the Divine Comedy itself is a work of Christian fiction literature, it also incorporates real-life historical figures as well as characters and concepts from Greek and Roman mythology. All of these things are fit into Dante's Christian narrative, but as we will see later, all of the stuff in this book and in this movie are Dante's opinions and not entirely representative of the opinions of the church. At the banks of this river, they watch as Charon ferries his boat up to the river bank. Both in this story and in Greek mythology, Charon was the ferryman who would bring souls into the afterlife. And so Charon fills his boat with souls and begins paddling away. And at the sight of this, Dante passes out. And he wakes up in the first level of hell, Limbo, which is the level that Virgil himself resides in. This lair is dedicated to the unbaptized. In other words, people who lived righteously during their lives, but were either born before the time of Jesus or were not Christian throughout their lives. And there is no active torture in Limbo. They are forced to just simply exist there in this plane, unable to die. And so all they can do really is just sit around and visit, basically. It's basically like life on Earth, except you just can't die. And so you just live your life, but it's forever. Many of the souls here simply lay around all day, not actively tortured, but forced to confront the despair of eternal nothingness. And in this lair, the two run into some of the greatest poets of history. There is Homer, who is famous for the Odyssey, and there's also Horace, who wrote many great works of poetry during the time of Augustus Caesar. There is Ovid, who wrote the Metamorphoses, and Lucan, who wrote Pharsalia. I hope I'm saying all of this right. I am not Italian, or Roman, or Greek. These four poets and Virgil are widely regarded as the greatest poets of Roman society, and possibly just humanity as a whole. And together, the five praise Dante and his works, saying that he has truly earned his spot among their ranks as one of the greatest poets of history. And in the Divine Comedy itself, this comes off as extremely pretentious. Dante literally writes a section in his book where all of his heroes say, you know what? You're one of the greats. You, Dante, are one of us. That's literally like if I wrote and directed a movie about myself in which, like, Martin Scorsese and Christopher Nolan and a bunch of other, like, well-known directors all gathered around me and said, you are the greatest director of all time. It's really weird in the book. However, I do think this actually works well in L'Inferno. You see, in the centuries since the Divine Comedy was written, both Dante and his works have become extremely important to the people of Italy. To the point where in 2021, on the 700th anniversary of the poet's death, they had a hearing in order to undo his exile from Florence. While this scene was of course pulled from the book itself, I do like to imagine that when the filmmakers were adapting this on the screen, it was them saying that truly Dante has become the fulfillment of that and has become one of the greatest poets of history. And together this group of six journey to another part of this limbo lair. Unlike the people that were laying on the ground in despair, these people are dressed in white and all walking and conversing with each other. Kings and queens, commoners and philosophers, all now made equal in this limbo, able to converse with each other, sharing knowledge and wisdom from their lives for all eternity. Don't get too comfortable though, this is about as good as it gets in hell. All these people having lived virtuously, but not following the path of God. Dante and Virgil part ways with the other poets, and together the two descend further into hell. They come upon Minos, who in Greek mythology was the king of Crete and the son of Zeus himself. And in hell, he judges all the souls that pass before him and decides what layer of hell they are to be assigned to. He questions Virgil on why Dante is there, as he is still alive, and Virgil says that they have been sent here on a mission from God, and hearing this, Minos lets them pass. They then arrive in the second layer of hell, but the first layer of active punishment. This is the layer for people who were lustful in life. And their punishment for being tossed around by the passions of lust is to forever be tossed around by violent winds in this massive storm system. This is the first layer where we get into special effects territory, and can I say, for 1911, this effect is insanely cool. I remember watching this for the first time and just being blown away by just how creative this was. In this circle, Dante meets two people by the name of Paolo and Francesca, and he hears their story. She was married to another man at the time, but after a night of reading with Paolo, the two had an affair. And we actually get a flashback to this scene, which is something that we will see more of later. Rather than just having their story told, we also get a glimpse at these souls while they were still alive. With their story told, the two spirits are blown away, and Dante passes out for a second time. They then come to the third layer, which is reserved for gluttons. They all lay on the ground, drenched by rains that will not end, and they are guarded by Cerberus, who in Greek mythology is the three-headed guard dog of the underworld. One soul lifts its head on their approach, and Dante asks the spirit what will become of his city of Florence. While the spirit cannot see the present, it tells Dante that in the future is a lot more violence and bloodshed for the city of Florence. With that, the spirit lays back in its torment, and the two depart. This layer is a lot more tame than it is in the actual Divine Comedy. In the book, the spirits of this layer are constantly feasted upon and torn to shreds by Cerberus, but not allowed to die. And so they lay on the ground and play dead in the hopes of not being noticed by this beast. It's a detail that's lost in this film, and I'll probably point out more later. But now we are on to the fourth circle, greed. That name is very simplified. This layer is actually both for those who hoarded money and those who spent money recklessly. But just to keep it on theme with the 7 deadly sins thing, I'm just gonna call it greed. This layer is guarded by Pluto, the Roman god of the underworld. It appears as though he has lost his mind. His eyes dart around wildly, and in the book, he is seen offering prayers to Satan. Virgil rebukes Pluto, who begins to scream, and so Virgil and Dante just kinda awkwardly shuffle away. In this lair, the spirits are forced to fight over these huge, heavy sacks of gold. Consumed by their greed, they beat each other with their fists and with these sacks of gold until none of these spirits are recognizable anymore. And in the book, Virgil states that this lair is full of many popes and cardinals of the church. It is very apparent in the entire Divine Comedy that Dante was very dissatisfied with what the church had become in his time. But enough of that, because now we're in the fifth layer of hell, wrath. They come to the bank of the river Styx, which again in Greek mythology was a river that flowed through the underworld. And here are the souls that have been completely consumed by anger. These souls are perpetually fighting, beating each other, and dragging each other into the water. A ferryman by the name of Phlegyas comes across the river Styx in order to take Dante and Virgil across the river to the city of Dis. This is a city in the Roman underworld, which was originally conceived by Virgil in the Aeneid. And in Dante's Inferno, the city of Dis divides hell itself. All of the layers prior to this were sinners who acted out of their own interests. But beyond the gates of the city of Dis lie the malicious sinners. In other words, the ones who willingly caused harm to others. A huge crowd is gathered at the gates of the city, blocking Dante and Virgil's path. Virgil tells them that they are on a mission from God, and in response, the crowd immediately disperses, some fleeing behind the gates of the city and barricading the door. But before the two can enter, the three Furies from Greek mythology appear above the gates of Dis. And just as quickly as they appeared, the Furies disappear, and an angel appears in front of the city. The angel points at the gates, which open, and then the angel disappears. This is an encounter that was way cooler in the book, but given the limitations of silent film, I can definitely see why. This was the early days of filmmaking, and the effects for the Furies and the Angel are still good. And beyond the gates, we come to the sixth layer of hell, Heresy. This is the lair for people who led others astray with false doctrines, or people who turned others away from the path of God. And their punishment is to forever be buried in these blazing tombs in the ground, perpetually in a state of being burned alive. As they walk through the circle, a figure arises out of his tomb. This is the Italian nobleman Farinata degli Uberti. You see, the Divine Comedy was written during the War of Eight Saints, which, as I've said, was a war between Pope Gregory XI and an alliance of Italian cities led by Florence. The reason Dante was exiled from Florence in the first place was because he was seen as a traitor to Florence for siding with the Pope. Uberti was a nobleman from the city of Florence who led the coalition against the Pope, and for this, Dante places him in the level of hell reserved for heretics. Also in this circle is a man named, and I'm not kidding here, Cavalcante di Cavalcanti. He was the father of a man by the name of Guido, who was a friend of Dante in the real world, and he sided with the Pope in this conflict. But why is he on the level of hell for heretics? Because while he did side with the Pope in this conflict, it is believed that Cavalcanti, as well as his son, was an atheist. And in the eyes of Dante, believing that there is no God is in itself an act of heresy. And so Cavalcanti is here in this lair of hell. He asks Dante of his son Guido, to which Dante tells this father that his son is dead. Having heard this, he simply lays back down in his burning coffin without another word. This very human moment of fatherly grief is again lost in this film, just because of the nature of it being a silent film. Departing from this lair, Dante and Virgil come upon a tomb that exists between the last lair of hell and the next. The inscription simply reads, "Pope Anastasius, I hold." And that's all that's given. We don't know why he's here in between these two levels of hell, or what's happening to him in here. It's only known that Pope Anastasius is in this coffin in between two layers of hell, and that's all we know. There is a special punishment in hell for Pope Anastasius, at least in Dante's opinion. This entire book is Dante's opinion. We then come to the next level of hell, which I have some thoughts about. Before I describe this lair, I just want to re-emphasize that the Divine Comedy is purely a fictional piece. Dante was a religious man, but all of these levels of hell and the punishments and the sins are all just purely his opinion. Dante's ideas on what a sin is not representative of what the church believes a sin is, far from it. And that is especially true in the case of this next lair, so just keep that in mind. All of that said, this level of hell is reserved for people who in life decided to take their own exit the game, leave the Minecraft server. I can't say the other word because this is YouTube, and I want to stay monetized, please. And the punishment for this lair is that all the souls within it are transfigured into these gnarled trees or bushes and forever nested in by harpies. Dante, not knowing this and only seeing a forest of dead trees around him, pulls a branch off of one of these trees, and as a result, the stump starts bleeding and smoking. The tree cries out and asks Dante why he would do that. We then cut to the story of this man and how he came to be in this lair of hell. His name is Pierre de la Vigne. He was an advisor to Frederick II, the Holy Roman Emperor of the 13th century. However, at this time, rumors of Pierre being a traitor began to circulate, and so he was arrested, and for this crime that we're not sure if he committed or not, his eyes were put out, or in other words, taken from him. I'm trying to keep descriptions of violence as low-key as possible, in the vain hope that YouTube will monetize this video. And this is a moment where I actually do think that the film impacts deeper than the book. As he sits alone in his cell, we see Pierre rip the bandages away from his eyes as he tries to look out the window of his cell and see the sun. But then he collapses on the ground in a fit of grief as he realizes he will never be able to see the sun again. He cries out and stumbles around the walls of his cell. This is one continuous shot that does not cut away. It's very brutal. And it is never shown, but of course after this, Pierre exited the server. After hearing this story, we see that a couple of spirits have somehow escaped their tormentors. One of them tries to hide in a bush in this forest, which, as we know, is the soul of someone who exited the server. These men are pursued by dogs. One of these dogs finds the sinner in the bush and jumps in and rips both the man and the bush to shreds, and both begin to scream as they are torn apart. And after the dogs leave, Dante attempts to organize the branches of this bush again, as if trying to provide the soul at least a small amount of comfort in his torment. They then come to the next section of the 7th layer. I should have mentioned this, but after the city of Dis, each circle of hell is divided into parts. This layer of hell is for violence. This first section was for violence against the self, and now we are here for the sinners who were violent against God. This can either be violence against God directly or against nature or works of art. Basically, violence against the things that God cherishes. In the book, there are 3 solid divisions of the violence circle. We have violence against self, violence against God and nature, and violence against art. But in the film, these circles are kind of blurred together, and the punishment for those violent against God is they are forced to endure fiery rain for all eternity. In this lair, they meet a man named Capaneus, a figure from Greek mythology. He is most known for his arrogance, defying Zeus to stop him from laying siege to a city. Spoiler alert, Zeus struck him down. And here in this lair of hell, he continues to curse Zeus as he lays on the burning ground, pelted by this fiery rain. Leaving this lair, Dante and Virgil come upon a monster named Geryon. This creature has the head of a man, the feet of a lion, and the body and tail of a dragon. This monster symbolizes the Malebolge, which is the 8th layer of hell. And so they get on Geryon's back and descend into the Malebolge. I looked up how to pronounce Malebolge, so if I'm saying it wrong, blame the internet. The Malebolge symbolizes fraud and is composed of 10 different circles. And this first circle is for ruffians, basically criminals and thugs who deceived people in order to take their money. And for this crime, they are whipped by demons, which these punishments are supposed to be getting worse, and yet apparently being whipped is worse than being burned alive in a stone coffin. I don't really think those two stack up. They then come to the second circle, which is reserved for, and I'm quoting here, flatterers and loose women. Flatterers refers to people who lavish false praise on others in order to receive some kind of compensation or money. So basically what Starscream is to Megatron. It's I wrote that in my script and it feels so weird referencing Transformers in a Dante's Inferno video. And you can probably guess what Dante means by loose women too. And for this, they are all immersed in manure, which gross. And the third circle of the Malebolge is for members of the church who sold indulgences or positions within the church. Salvation was always meant to be free, but at some point the Catholic Church started paywalling salvation, which you might not know this, is one of the reasons that the Protestant church is now a thing. And for this fraud within the church, all who participated end up here. They are buried upside down in holes in the ground, with their feet set on fire. Dante and Virgil float down to these people, one of whom is Pope Nicholas III, who gave positions of power in the church to members of his family. Dante at this point goes off on the Pope, denouncing him for his nepotism and corruption. The fourth circle of the Malebolge is for sorcerers, astrologers, and soothsayers, people who frauded others with fake fortunes and fake magic. In other words, if you're a Libra, pay attention to this next part. For this, their heads have been twisted backwards, and they are forced to walk backwards for all eternity. And while this is a chilling concept, is that really worse than getting burned alive in a stone coffin? I'm still on about that. Like, that's easily the worst one so far in my books. Maybe being trapped in, like, the tubes with your feet set on fire would be worse. Depends if you're claustrophobic or not, I guess. It's like getting an MRI, except your feet are in a deep fryer. The image itself is very chilling, though. The fake heads that they use in L'Inferno really do fall into the uncanny valley effect for me. The fifth circle is for berators, in other words, blackmailers and shady businessmen. These people are forever immersed in boiling tar for an eternity. Technically, it's boiling pitch, which is slightly different, but no one in the 21st century knows what pitch is, and tar is pretty close to what pitch is. And they are guarded by hordes of demons with sticks that are used to push sinners below the surface should they decide to escape. So if you're not fully immersed in the tar, you will be pushed under it. And as the two watch, a demon brings a new sinner to this vat of tar and tosses him in. He struggles for a moment before being pushed under by the demons. In this lair of the Malebolge, Virgil talks to the demon Malacoda. In this story, he is the leader of 12 demons who guard this circle of the Malebolge. Malacoda then chooses 10 demons to escort Dante and Virgil to the next circle. As they walk along the trail, a demon with his stick pulls a man out of the vat of tar. It's unclear why in the film. However, what they had planned must have been awful because the man willingly jumps back in to the lake of boiling tar. Two demons fly in after him and become trapped in the tar themselves. Dante and Virgil finally make it to the edge of this circle of hell, and the demons' true plan is finally revealed. They pursue the two with their tridents in the hopes of dragging Dante and Virgil back to the lake of boiling tar. However, the two slide down a ledge and into the sixth circle of the Malebolge. This lair is reserved for hypocrites, and their punishment is to walk in circles for an eternity, forever weighed down by these heavy white robes made of lead. Which, again, is this worse than being placed in a burning coffin of stone? I don't think so. It's Dante's story. I'm just gonna let the man cook. Everyone marches in a line, forever walking in circles. However, there is one spirit here that is tortured above all the others in this lair. You see, within this lair of the Malebolge is Caiaphas. He was the high priest of Jerusalem in the 1st century. He helped orchestrate the plot to kill Jesus and presided over his trial before being handed over to Roman authorities. He was instrumental in the events that led to the crucifixion of Jesus, and for that, in this circle of hell, he is given a very special punishment. He is crucified to the floor of this lair of hell, with nails driven through his hands and his feet. And the rest of these people in this lair of hell, made heavier by their robes made of lead, are tasked with trampling Caiaphas underfoot for eternity. Having witnessed this, Dante and Virgil climb a cliff face into the 7th circle of the Malebolge. This lair is for thieves, and their punishment is to be forever bitten by snakes and other reptiles. This lair is suspiciously empty, but we soon find out why. A new thief arrives in this lair and is almost immediately bitten by a snake. And as soon as this happens, he is disintegrated into ashes. And almost immediately after that, the ashes reform back into this thief. The people of this lair are bitten by snakes that turn them into ash and then reformed so they can go through it all over again. Also in this lair are thieves of public money. These thieves are turned into reptiles which are forced to bite others, and when they do bite others, they are turned back into themselves. And so we get this really cool effect for the time of a person being transformed into this reptilian humanoid, and then the reptile that bit him turns back into a human. It's just really cool. They then come to the 8th circle, which is for fraudulent counselors. In other words, people who caused the downfall of others through misleading advice. And for this, they are constantly enveloped in flame. That's it. They're just burning alive, and that's their punishment. The 9th circle of the Malebolge is for the sowers of discord. Basically, those who caused chaos through misleading other people. And for this, they are constantly mutilated by the demons that guard them. In other words, they have pieces of themselves separated from themselves. I'm trying to keep this as monetizable as possible, so what Vader did to Luke Skywalker, just that. For eternity, just having more of that done to you. And one of the people in this lair with his chest ripped open is Muhammad, the prophet of the Muslim faith. I am not gonna show this one because, one, even with the dated effects of the day, I don't think YouTube will like that. And two, I feel like that it would be just insanely disrespectful to the second largest religious organization in the world. So I'm not doing that. Watch the movie for yourself. I'm sure I have it linked in the description. And another person there is Bertrand de Born. He was a baron from 12th century France. When Richard the Lionheart of England became king, Bertrand began writing these poems in order to incite a war between France and Britain. France and England, sorry. And now in this lair of hell, his head is removed from his body. And so he wanders this lair of hell, carrying his head like a lantern ahead of him. This is also a really cool effect in the film. There are so many of these shots that are done practically, and I just love it so much. We finally come to the final circle of the Malebolge, which is reserved for counterfeiters. And these people are perpetually suffering from diseases such as leprosy and other deadly ailments, but unable to die. This form of suffering is so great that many of the inhabitants of this lair are driven to insanity. And at the end of the Malebolge, Dante and Virgil come upon 3 giants. These giants are Nimrod, Ephialtes, and Antaeus, 3 giants from Greek mythology. Antaeus takes the 2 in his hands and lowers them into the 9th circle of hell. This lair is the Cocytus, a perpetually frozen lake. The 9th circle is betrayal, and this section of the 9th circle is for people who betrayed those close to them. And I do like this, the idea that in the cosmic scales of justice, it is worse to betray someone close to you than it is to fraud a stranger. I may not agree with many of the rankings of Dante's sins or what punishments they get, but on this, I'm with him. The souls in this lair are frozen in this lake with only their heads above the surface. The next section of the 9th circle is for those who betrayed their country or their political party. And on this, I immediately lost Dante. I was talking about agreeing with him with the other stuff, but I just have no patriotism, so I don't get why this one's so low. And before I describe what I'm about to describe, it's important to understand in the Divine Comedy that the character journey that Dante goes on, especially in the Inferno, is a lot different than a traditional narrative, a lot more different. See, comedy back in the day didn't refer to a funny story. It referred to a story in which all of the characters in it get exactly what they deserve. The inscription over the gates of hell reflects this. Justice incited my sublime creator. In other words, justice was the reason for hell's creation. And so Dante's journey in the Inferno, and by extension in this film, L'Inferno, is coming from a position of empathizing with these people to a position of realizing that they are getting exactly what they deserve. And with that in mind, Dante comes upon in this lair a traitor to Florence, the city that he loves so dearly. And he immediately chastises the man, grabbing his head and pulling chunks of his hair out. So yeah, not a conventional moral arc, at all. They also come upon a man named Count Ugolino, an Italian nobleman who was accused of treason. For this, he was locked in a tower with his sons to starve, and it is heavily implied that he survived for so long in there using the only food available to him. You know, a little bit of, like, Hannibal Lecter shenanigans, if you get my drift. And as he tells his story, we see the actual scene of him being trapped in this cell with his sons as they all slowly succumb to starvation and become weaker and weaker. And so here in the Cocytus, he gnaws on the back of the head of the man in front of him. This head belongs to an archbishop who in life sentenced innocent men to die. The final layer of the Cocytus is for people who betrayed guests. Their victims put full trust in their hosts, and for this were either metaphorically or literally stabbed in the back. And in the background of this shot, we see a terrifying sight that we will get to in a little bit because I don't want to spoil it just yet. But I'll show you the shot later because it's really cool. In this lair, Dante and Virgil meet Friar Alberigo, a friar who had his brother and nephew killed at a party that he was hosting. He is very sorrowful for what he has done, and his tears of regret froze to his eyes, permanently blinding him. He begs Dante to chisel the ice away from his eyes, but Dante does nothing, because, as the story is trying to say, he is getting exactly what he deserves. And then at last, we come to the final layer of hell, full of the most punished people in all of hell. People so evil who committed crimes so heinous that there is only 4 of them in this final layer of hell. The first and most obvious, of course, is Satan, the devil himself, for betraying God and leading a third of the angels up against him, as well as betraying humanity and leading them down a path of selfishness and destruction. He is placed here in the final layer of hell. He is a giant with 6 wings and 3 heads. Well, not 3 heads, he's got 3 faces coming out of the 2 sides of his head, and of course the normal face side. In his 3 mouths are the 3 other people in hell, the most punished humans in all of hell, for ever having the flesh and muscle of their bodies stripped away by Satan's teeth, but unable to die. In the 2 faces on the sides, with their faces poking out of those 2 mouths, are Brutus and Cassius. See, Dante was a huge fan of the Roman Empire, and he believed that Julius Caesar was the key to this, like, golden age civilization. And so for their role in the assassination of Julius Caesar, Brutus and Cassius are sentenced to this layer of hell to have their lower bodies stripped away by Satan's teeth forever. And finally, the last man and arguably the most punished soul in all of hell, of course, is Judas Iscariot. For betraying Jesus, leading to his arrest and ultimately his crucifixion, Judas is in the central mouth of Satan, face first. And these shots are really well done in the film. Satan towering over Dante and Virgil as he feasts on the 3 most tortured souls in this final layer of hell. And then, after witnessing all of hell and the tortures contained within, Dante and Virgil follow a creek leading out of hell. And at last, they come out and behold the stars again. And this is the end of the film L'Inferno. In reflecting on this film and how it stacks up to the source material, I have so many positive things to say, as well as a few things that detract from it, in my opinion. Firstly, I have to commend this film's impact when it was first made. This was the first ever blockbuster movie, and arguably the first horror movie. It is also the oldest surviving feature-length film. Many cinema firsts are attributed to this film. When the film was released in America, it made $2 million, which in today's money is roughly equivalent to $52 million. And the visual style of this movie is genuinely inspired. As I said at the beginning, they were heavily inspired by the works of Gustave Doré, but how they achieved these looks is insanely impressive. We take CGI for granted these days, but these filmmakers were pulling off shots like this in their movies well before CGI was even a possibility. And I do love how this film would occasionally show flashbacks of these sinners during their lives. It adds a level of depth and empathy, especially considering we cannot hear these stories for ourselves as the film is silent. Some of these scenes and images are very powerful, and I think elevates the story beyond what is possible in the written medium. But now onto the one but rather large thing that I take issue with in this film. This film does so many cool things, but one flaw that I find in it is its message. In the Divine Comedy, even when navigating the levels of hell and their punishments and tortures, there is still this through line that follows Dante through hell, purgatory, and then finally heaven. And that through line is the love of God. It's hard to see if you only focus on the Inferno, but it was just as sublime and the primal love that created hell in the first place. Not everyone who sins goes to hell, otherwise everyone would go to hell. The purpose of the Inferno, apart from getting across Dante's own rhetoric, was to show that these sinners chose to walk a path of selfishness and walk alone. They are not here solely because of the sins they committed, but because they chose to walk this path away from God. Dante was summoned on this mission because he was heading in the same direction, but Beatrice saw this and hoped that he could be returned to the correct path. He goes through the Inferno to see what punishments await him should he continue on this path, and then in Purgatory he is systematically purified of all of his sins, and in Paradise he is brought closer and closer to perfect grace until finally he is able to see God face to face. It is a really cool and profound journey of healing and redemption, and something that I think is entirely lost in L'Inferno. It was certainly an effective horror when it was released, but it lacks any reference to that primal love or the love of God. The main goal of the film, I believe, was simply to scare immoral people into a life of piety with God. And this is why I think the message of the film is flawed. Faith should not come from scaring people with visions of hell. This will raise up Christians who are ruled by fear and a strict adherence to a legalistic church rather than to the actual laws of God. Faith should come first from a place of unselfish love, the same love that began Dante's journey through the unseen realms and into paradise, the same love that God has for us. Compared to that love and the love that is seen in the Divine Comedy, this film feels purely like a scare tactic from a pious and religious society, and a finger of judgment pointed at all those who watch it. But despite all that, I do believe that L'Inferno deserves its position as a formative piece of cinema history. It is an imperfect idea executed to perfection. And I hope that I managed to do this story some justice, and I hope that I managed to convey both the excellence and the flaws present in this film. And if you've stuck around this long, then thank you so much for watching. We are now at over 2,500 subs, which is amazing, so thank you all so much for being here and watching these videos. I'm gonna try and get this video edited and uploaded as soon as possible because I am moving home next week. And speaking of which, it's going to take some time for me to get fully unpacked and settled where I'm going back home. So I won't have another video for you all next week, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of my videos that I did recently on Oppenheimer. I'm going to trim all the intros and outros out of those videos, make a new intro and outro, and upload it to the channel while I'm moving as kind of my definitive work on Oppenheimer. And so I hope you'll enjoy that mega video because Oppenheimer is easily in my top 3 films of all time, and in my opinion, the greatest film of the 21st century. And so I hope that you'll tune in and listen to why I believe that to be true. And of course, a huge thank you to the patrons. You are all amazing. Sean and my top tier patrons, RD and Snowy. Thank you so much for supporting me this long and supporting the content. It means the world. You're all helping my dreams come true of being able to do this for you all full time. And thanks to you all, now that I'm monetized, just watching this video to the end is support enough. So thank you so much. But if you want access to exclusive content, including weekly live streams I do with my patrons talking about all the things that I'm working on, exclusive photos and videos when I start working on these projects, and a group chat that I have with all of my Patreon members, then consider joining below. The link is in the description and in the end card. But thank you so much. I'm gonna get to editing this video right away, and I hope that you will enjoy, and I will see you in a little bit for another great video. I hope you're excited for that because I know that I am. And cut.